Sergeant Myers stopped him on a dark street, unleashing a barrage of insults, because all he saw was another suspicious black man. But that night, he didn't know that his suspect was actually the new chief of police, a man determined to change the very system that created cops like Myers. The truth would soon shatter his world and reshape the entire town. What Jason did next would shock even those who thought they'd seen it all. But let's start at the beginning. In the small, sleepy town of Coldwater, where tradition and unwritten rules ran deep, Sergeant Hank Myers operated with the kind of authority that seemed to be written into his very DNA. A veteran on the force, Hank had long believed in keeping order his own way. No one questioned his methods, not the townsfolk, not his colleagues. That's just how things were done in Coldwater. One early evening, Hank spotted a young black man walking along the side of the road near an upscale neighborhood. To Hank, there was something about him that didn't sit right. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and pulled his cruiser to the curb, stepping out with a posture of righteous authority. "Hey, you!" he barked, crossing the road with purpose, already sizing up the man as trouble. "Where you been? What's in that bag? Why are you just wandering around here?" The young man, named Jason, looked at Hank calmly, unflinching. Dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt, with a brown leather satchel slung over his shoulder, he seemed unfazed by the aggression coming his way. "I'm just walking, officer. Nothing in the bag but some papers," he replied, his voice even and measured. But Jason's calm demeanor seemed to rile Hank up even more. Something about his steadiness felt like a challenge to Hank's authority, and it made his blood boil. He narrowed his eyes, his mind racing through the list of possible infractions he could pin on this stranger. In Coldwater, he had a reputation for making quick, often harsh judgments, and for him, this was no different. What's that supposed to mean? Just walking? Out here alone, after dark, with a bag and a story that doesn't add up? Hank's voice dripped with disdain as he got closer, eyes scrutinizing Jason, looking for any sign of guilt or defiance. As Jason continued to hold his composure, a small crowd began to gather from the nearby houses. Some neighbors peeked out their windows. Others stood in their driveways, drawn by Hank's loud, accusatory voice. But Hank didn't care who was watching. He was a man who saw himself as the law around here, and nothing, not a crowd, not a calm reply from Jason, was going to stop him from doing what he felt was his duty. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Hank ordered, reaching for his handcuffs. Jason hesitated for a split second, and that was all Hank needed. He grabbed Jason's arm, pulling it back roughly as he snapped the cuffs on and forced him to sit on the curb. "Sit down right there. We're not done yet," Hank barked, his voice echoing as the crowd continued to watch. For Hank, this was just another night of keeping things in line, his way. For Jason, it was the start of something he hadn't expected, but he would handle it in a way Hank could never have anticipated. The situation escalated quickly, tension thick in the air. What had started as a harsh stop turned into something much uglier, with Sergeant Myers' words laced with venom and a thinly veiled disdain. "You're all the same," Myers sneered, his voice low but charged, the type of insult designed to strip a man's dignity with a single phrase. His words stung, and the crowd shifted uneasily, a collective murmur of discomfort rippling through them. People were no longer just watching. They were judging. And some began pulling out their phones, capturing the scene as it unfolded in real time. Jason's wife, Angela, stood a little distance away, her face a careful mask of control as her eyes remained locked on her husband. She was fighting every instinct in her body to rush to his side, to scream at Myers to back off. But she knew that it would only fuel Myers' rage, so instead she stayed put, gripping her purse so hard her knuckles turned white. Her gaze met Jason's for a brief moment, and she could see he was trying to communicate something with just his eyes. "Hold steady, I've got this." Jason kept his composure, refusing to let Myers see him flinch. The calm in his eyes seemed to unsettle Myers, who was clearly used to his intimidation tactics yielding different results. Instead of begging or reacting, Jason simply maintained the quiet, steady gaze that seemed almost detached. It was as if he was letting Myers' insults roll off him like water. But Myers only grew more enraged. His face twisted with frustration as he continued to hurl accusations and insults, as if desperately trying to crack Jason's stoic armor. "What are you looking at me like that for, huh?" Myers barked, his words biting into the stillness. "Think you're better than me?" The sergeant leaned in, his voice a harsh whisper that somehow seemed louder than a shout. "Or are you just waiting for the chance to run, like the rest of them?" Jason took a breath, his face still calm, though his wife could see the restraint in his jaw. Angela felt a wave of pride mixed with dread, proud of his resilience, but terrified of where this confrontation might lead. A voice from the crowd spoke up, a young woman holding her phone in the air, recording. "Leave him alone! He hasn't done anything wrong!" Others nodded, murmuring in agreement. The community was no longer silent witnesses. They were becoming vocal, challenging the sergeant's behavior. Jason kept his eyes on Angela, then gave her a subtle nod. He wasn't going to let Myers drag him down into a fight. It was as if he were telling her, "I'm okay. We'll get through this." As Sergeant Myers finally paused, his words spent, the air still crackling with tension, the unmistakable sound of a police cruiser approached, its lights casting a red and blue glow over the crowd. The officer inside was none other than Captain Tom Hendricks, head of the department, a respected figure in the town. Hendricks had responded to a call from a concerned citizen, and as he stepped out of the car, his gaze quickly fell on the scene before him. A tense crowd, a man in cuffs on the curb, and his own sergeant standing over him with a look of smug satisfaction. Captain Hendricks's eyes scanned the crowd and then landed on the cuffed man. His brow furrowed in confusion and then deepened in shock as he recognized Jason Miller. Just last month, Jason had been appointed the new chief of police, brought in from the city to oversee reforms and bring a fresh perspective to the department. Hendricks knew Jason was a man of integrity and fairness, a man whose appointment had been celebrated for its potential to bring much-needed change to Coldwater's police force. For a moment, Hendricks was rooted in place, his mind racing to process the situation. Then, with a deep breath and a flash of steely determination, he strode over to Myers, his face set with a cold, controlled fury. "Sergeant Myers!" Hendricks's voice rang out, clear and firm, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Myers turned to him, a smug smile still lingering, until he caught the expression on his superior's face. Confusion flickered across his own features, then quickly twisted into something closer to fear. "Take off the handcuffs, now!" Hendricks commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Myers hesitated, but Hendricks's unyielding stare made it clear there was no choice. Myers fumbled with the key, his hands suddenly unsteady as he unlocked the cuffs, the clinking sound almost deafening in the stunned silence. Jason rose slowly, rubbing his wrists where the metal had dug in. His eyes met Hendricks's, and a silent understanding passed between them, a moment of mutual respect and gratitude. Hendricks then turned to the crowd, his voice loud and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to your new chief of police, Mr. Jason Miller." The words hung in the air, met with a few seconds of stunned silence, before a wave of cheers and applause broke out among the townspeople. People clapped, whistled, and called out Jason's name in celebration, a visible wave of relief and joy spreading across the crowd. Myers stood there, face pale and expression frozen in shock. The gravity of his mistake hit him like a physical blow. He'd just publicly humiliated his new boss, the very man who now held his career in his hands. Jason knew that the events of that day couldn't just be brushed aside. They had illuminated a deep, ingrained problem that required more than just apologies or disciplinary actions. If change was to happen, it had to be systemic. With a renewed sense of purpose, Jason began drafting a comprehensive reform plan that would address the very roots of bias and unprofessionalism within the department. In the following weeks, Jason held a series of meetings with community leaders, city officials, and members of his department, listening intently to their concerns and experiences. His plan included mandatory training on cultural awareness, ethics, and de-escalation techniques. He emphasized that respect and dignity would be at the core of every officer's duties. The department's new code of conduct laid out strict consequences for any actions that even hinted at prejudice or abuse of power. Jason believed that if officers truly understood the communities they served, the impulse to view people through the lens of suspicion and bias would diminish. As part of his reforms, Jason made an example of Myers. He decided not to fire him, understanding that dismissing him might just push him further into his biases. Instead, Myers was demoted and assigned to a program that focused on ethics, empathy, and professional behavior. It was a move that sent a clear message. There would be no tolerance for the type of actions that Myers had displayed, but there would also be room for growth and accountability. Jason hoped this would resonate, not just with Myers, but with every officer watching. Months went by, and gradually, a new spirit began to settle over the department. Officers took part in regular community outreach, getting to know residents beyond their badges and uniforms. Training sessions became forums for genuine dialogue, where officers could voice their challenges and confront their own biases in a constructive environment. Jason's reforms had created an atmosphere where professionalism and empathy became cornerstones of every interaction. When Myers returned to the department, he was a changed man. The time spent in training had humbled him, forcing him to confront the beliefs that had once defined his approach to the job. Under Jason's leadership, Myers found himself learning how to be a different kind of officer, one who prioritized understanding over assumptions and respect over authority. Coldwater's police department transformed in the months that followed. Gone were the days of unchecked authority and whispered rumors of prejudice. Under Jason's steady, resolute guidance, the department had become a model of professionalism and integrity, proof that even deeply rooted problems could be addressed with the right leadership and unwavering commitment to change.